is an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering the 5th season, brought to you by Ashlynn. Chapters 7 and 8 and Interlude. In these chapters, so it turns out that the little boy that joined us at the fireside is indeed the rock child. I'm pretty sure. Also, there's a really horrifying revelation about how nodes function, and it's going to be really hard for me to talk about. So get ready. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everybody. I am Natasha. This was a lot. This book is a lot. I really, really like it. Don't get me wrong. I don't want people listening to this to think that if something is too much that I sign off. That's not it at all. It's just the kind of thing that it catches me by surprise, I feel like is what it is, because I go into a book not knowing anything about it, of course. I don't even read the back of it. I try not to get spoiled on anything about it. And inevitably, when a book starts off, I have to adjust all of my expectations, as unaware as I was that those expectations existed based off of nothing but a title and a cover. They still do exist a little. And I have to prepare myself for the tone that this book, the new book that I'm covering, is going to be using, and the kind of subject matter that it's going to be dealing with, the themes, all of this. And with the 5th season, I went into it, I was in many ways prepared for the book to be sort of heavy, because it was written by a black woman, and I feel like black women have the right to write heavier stuff, and I just sort of expect that because they're coming from a place that has been silenced for so long, that in a lot of ways I am prepared, and so I think. And so going into this, I in some ways knew that this was going to be pretty tough. But the book keeps surprising me in the way that it springs it on me. The things that I expect to be explored more isn't even the things, I guess, that I expect to be hit the hardest in terms of the way the author talks about them. And by that I mean, there is a danger when you're dealing with themes like this that are barely camouflaged, sort of like metaphors for racism and rage and power and oppression. That sort of thing, you know what you're getting, and so I'm prepared and ready, expecting the metaphors coming from that direction to be of a certain tone and handled a certain way, and oftentimes to be really kind of in your face. And because of that, I am not ready for other things that are subtler, because, of course, dealing with these kinds of themes, I am not somebody who has experienced oppression in a real way other than being a woman. And that is really the one subset of, other than that, there hasn't been that many struggles for me that I've noticed. Maybe being overweight, that's another thing. But it's this is so, she's dealing with so many things that once she brings them to my attention, I'm like, oh, of course. But it doesn't occur to me to be prepared for that. And it's sort of reminding me of when you are going through the grieving process, and those of you who've lost somebody are going to know exactly what I'm talking about, where you are going into a house where this person used to live to clear out their stuff, and you have mentally prepared yourself that this is going to be a really emotional task, that you're going to be around their stuff, things are going to smell like them. You're ready. You go in knowing that this is the thing. And because you're so ready, things don't hit you the way that you expected them to hit you. But then you're riding around with your friends in the car and somebody turns on the radio and there's a song that reminds you of this person, and somebody is singing along with it in a similar way to the person. And because you were not prepared at all, it hits you like a ton of bricks. And suddenly you are crying in the car with your friends when you were having a really good time 2 seconds ago. And that's how this book feels to me. It feels like unexpected grief, that I'm ready for it coming from this one direction and have myself steeled for it. And then it comes at me from a whole other direction. And I'm like, but I wasn't, wait, hold on. I don't have the shields up on that side. So yeah. And I feel like that's a really effective way of writing. I mean, like, that's good. If I can't predict where you're coming from, if I can't see that a mile away, good on you, you know, because like, I am by no means the most well-read person I know. Not even a little bit. Like, I'm frequently embarrassed by the things that I haven't read. However, having done Unspoiled for as long as I have, even if you read a lot, even if you watch a lot of television and stuff, if you don't go through it the way that I do, with a really analytical eye, you may not be as ready for certain patterns and tropes to crop up. And that's the danger of doing what I do, is that I get so, like, things become more and more predictable as I become more and more exposed to things that follow those patterns. And predictability isn't necessarily a terrible thing in and of itself, but it usually goes hand in hand with something that's unimaginative. And so, yeah, the fact that I've been doing this as long as I have, and she still manages to be somewhat unpredictable, that's really quite impressive. So anyway, I'm going to get this started. So this starts off again with the second person present narrative. In the morning you rise and move on, and the boy comes with you. The two of you trudge south through hill country and falling ash. The child is an immediate problem. He's filthy, for one. You couldn't see the night before in the dark, but he's absolutely covered in dried and drying mud, stuck on twigs, earth knows what else. Caught in a mudslide, probably. Those happen a lot during shakes. If so, he's lucky to be alive. But still, when he wakes up and stretches, you grimace at the smears and flakes of dirt he's left on your bedroll. It takes you 20 minutes to realize he's naked under all the mess. When you question him about this and everything else, he's cagey. He shouldn't be old enough to be effectively cagey, but he is. He doesn't know the name of the calm he's from, or the people who birthed him, who apparently are not very many in number. He says he doesn't have any parents. He doesn't know his use name, which you are certain is a blatant lie. Even if his mother didn't know his father, he would have inherited her use cast. He's young and maybe orphaned, but not too young to know his place in the world. Children far younger than this boy understand things like that. Uche was only 3, and he knew he was an innovator like his father, and that this was why all his toys were tools and books and items that could be used for building things. And he knew, too, that there were things he could not discuss with anyone except his mother, and even then only when they were alone. Things about Father Earth and his whispers, way down below things, as Uche had called them. So, I have so many questions about this because it's slowly being filled out. So I have faith that like a lot of this will become clearer as we move through this book. But the talk of the use cast and the way that children are given certain toys and are expected to be a certain way, I'm really curious if this is simply an arbitrary, like, And by arbitrary, when I say that, I mean like societally, we just decide things. And when you really look at why we've chosen things the way that we have, it doesn't make any sense. For example, gender norms with like gender like name reveals for babies, or name reveals, gender reveals for babies. For some reason, boys get bugs and trains and dinosaurs and, you know, that kind of thing associated with their gender when they're babies. And girls get butterflies and glitter. And when you really stop and think about it, that's weird. It's a weird thing that we've all agreed on. So when I say arbitrary, that's really what I mean, is that for whatever reason, the society that they live in decided that a certain group of people was going to be innovators, perhaps? Or is this more like what's going on in the fulcrum in terms of trying to breed people to be a certain way? And I feel like there's a reference to that later on in this chapter, which we will get to, but I am just really curious about this use cast system and how people wind up, where they end up, if there's any moving out of your cast. Like, he was 3 years old and he was being given these toys. That's way before a child has had time to display any kinds of aptitude for anything, right? So I really wonder a lot about how all of that works and how restrictive it is. If there's like, if it's not about aptitude, if it's simply about the education that you're going to be getting, like, are there specific schools for certain casts? Like, I would imagine that would have to be true. And maybe there's more room to move around within the cast as to what you do precisely. But yeah, this is just really interesting to me. So you're walking along with this little boy, and everybody is sort of giving you weird looks because you're with this little boy who's buck-ass naked and filthy. It just doesn't look real good on you. You know, it makes you look like if this is your kid, you're clearly neglecting the child. If it is not your kid, but you're allowing him to hang out with you, and yet you're not making sure that he's even clean, it is kind of like, why are you even allowing him to be around you then? Like, what's the point? And finally, you give him some soap and show him how to use it, because he stares at you holding it, not aware at all what he's supposed to do with it. So it turns out that this kid is white all over. Even his eyes. I love this description. Scared you a bit when you woke up in the morning and he looked at you, all that dark mud surrounding 2 points of glaring silvery blue. He doesn't look quite human, but then people with ice white eyes rarely do. You've heard that in the Yemenis, among the breeder use cast, ice white eyes were especially desirable. Sanzeds liked that ice white eyes were intimidating and a little creepy. They are, but the eyes aren't what makes Hoa creepy. He's inordinately cheerful, for one. When you rose the morning after he joined you, he was already awake and playing with your tinderbox. And he was humming idly to himself as he twirled the flint in his fingers. So yeah, you wake up and this dude's been digging through your little pack, and the world is burning around you, and there's ash everywhere, and he's like cheery and humming. Yeah, that's pretty creepy. And again, the Yemenis breeder use cast, like, just purely people who but you are able to have children. Like, this character had her own 2 children. So I don't know what the breeders do officially if other people are allowed to reproduce also. Like, it's not a restricted thing. So when you've got your pack on, you look at him and he looks back at you. He's clutching to his chest that bundle you glimpsed the night before. A wad of rags tied around something is all you can tell. It rattles a little when he squeezes it. You can tell that he's anxious. Those eyes of his can't hide anything. So I'm assuming that little thing that he's carrying is the chunks of that red crystal that he broke off when he hatched and ate. So that's his food. But he's not being, obviously, super forthcoming about the fact that he is a stone child. But he's definitely drawn to her because she's an origin. So that, we find out later that he can sense that, and he can sense her daughter as well, even though she's really far away. And I'm super curious what that's like. Like, what exactly about her does he sense? Is it like shockwaves, sort of like the earth? Like, does she give off the same sort of signals as the earth does when it's moving? Is it something in the air? Is it a mental kind of link that he can like feel them around him mentally? It makes sense that something made of stone like this boy would be able to sense a person who is capable of controlling stone. That makes a lot of sense. But it's surprising to me that there's no description of her sensing anything in him, because you'd think that as sensitive as origins seem to be to the shifts of the earth, so sensitive that we find out later literal babies can calm seismic shifting. It's surprising that she doesn't sense something is going on with him. Maybe she's not paying enough attention. Maybe she hasn't clued in on that. But yeah, it's so yeah. A man walks beside a rickety cart and a half spavined horse. Spavined, I've looked it up, means that you have giant joints from overuse, I guess. The cart is full of belongings and old people, though the walking man is hardly younger. All of them stare at you as you step from behind the hill. A group of 6 women who have clearly banded together for safety whisper among themselves at the sight of you, and then one of them says loudly to another, "Rusting earth, look at her. No. Apparently, you look dangerous, or undesirable, or both. Or maybe it's Hoa's appearance that puts them off." So this is when she brings him to bathe, and he comes out, and this is such a weird description of his hair, and I'm really curious about what exactly this means. Oh, right. Am I gone? I'm hoping that you guys can still hear me. So first there's the moment where he slips and you offer him a hand to get to his feet again. And he doesn't want to touch you, but you take it as him being an ungrateful little brat, which obviously it's just that he's afraid that once you lay a finger on him, you'll be able to tell that he's not made of flesh. He doesn't seem to notice the sarcasm. Setting down a bundle on the gravel bank, he walks forward into the water until it rises to about his waist. Then he squats to try to scrub himself. So he goes in, washes himself, washes his hair. The boy comes out of the water and you stare. Well, that's different. Free of mud, his hair is ash blow coarse. That perfect, weatherproof texture the Sanzed values so much, already beginning to stiffen and poof up as it dries. It will be long enough to keep his back warm, at least. So, when this description starts, coarse, stiffening and poofing up as it dries, I'm assuming that this is some really textured, the kind of hair that would turn into an afro, African American hair, that sort of has such volume and texture that it is able to stand up by itself. But then she says that it is long enough to keep his back warm. And when hair that texture grows, it grows outward. It doesn't have the looseness and the weight to pull it down. So that it falls down your back. It just continues to grow outward. So I'm really baffled as to what exactly this is supposed to be here. And that it's weatherproof. that also sounds to me like something that describes African American hair, because like, obviously, if you're trying to style it in a specific way, weatherproof is not what you would call it, because, you know, as somebody with just curly hair, I already am very much at the whims of the weather in terms of like how I can style my hair, and black hair is that way as well. But if you're just going to let it grow, getting rained on and doing this, like, all you have to do is comb it out. It's not going to be like high maintenance where you need to braid it back necessarily. It's just a weird description that does not give me a clear idea of what this kid is supposed to look like in that regard. So I'm really curious if y'all have like an explanation on that. But it is white, not the normal gray. And his skin is white, not just pale. Not even Antarctic people are ever quite that colorless. Not that you've seen. His eyebrows are white above his ice-white eyes. White, white, white. He almost disappears amid the falling ash as he walks. Albino? Maybe. There's also something off about his face. You wonder what you're seeing, and then you realize there's nothing Sanzed about him, except the texture of his hair. There's a broadness to his cheekbones, an angularity to his jaws and eyes that seems wholly alien to your eyes. His mouth is full-lipped but narrow, so much so that you think he might have trouble eating, though obviously that's not true, or he wouldn't have survived to this age. His short stature is part of it, too. He's not just small, but stocky, as if his people are built for a different kind of sturdiness than the ideal that old Sanze has spent millennia cultivating. Again, with the cultivating, like the breeders, like, apparently they're trying to create a perfect race, but I don't know what that has to do with the rest of the people who are just procreating the normal way. Maybe his race are all this white then, whoever they are, but none of this makes sense. Every race in the world these days is part Sanzed. They did rule the stillness for centuries, after all, and they continue to do so in many ways. And they weren't always peaceful about it, so even the most insular races bear the Sanzed stamp, whether their ancestors wanted the admixture or not. Everyone is measured by their standard deviations from the Sanzed mean. This boy's people, whoever they are, have clearly managed to remain outliers. So, again, the Sanzed are white people, right? They're colonizers. They're people who are not only invading everywhere and like getting their blood into all of these different races, whether those races want them there or not, but they are also what is like the standard of beauty and are trying to breed more people to look closer to their standard. I'm guessing that the gentleman the little girl is traveling with, whose name I've forgotten now, is a Sanzed because he is really, like, you know, very pale, white hair. The perfect weatherproof texture already beginning to stiffen and poof up as it dries. Is it just, I was going to say, is it just straight hair, but ash blow coarse? That doesn't sound right. So yeah, I'm wondering what it is. But yeah, so the Sanzed are kind of beginning to crystallize in my mind a little bit more in terms of like what they represent and how similar they are. They are supremacists, right? And I want to say white supremacists, but I'm guessing that that's like part of it. If they value ice white eyes, I'm going to guess that they value white skin also, but that's not clear yet. So we'll see. So she says to the kid, "What the hell are you?" And he's just like, "Oh, you're such a weirdo. Am I clean enough?" And he like just totally puts you off so that you don't follow up and answer the question. You start to dress him, and I really liked this moment a lot. And you're thinking to yourself, it's easier than getting Uche dressed. At least this boy doesn't wiggle. You stop. You go away for a bit. When you return to yourself, the sky is brighter, and Hoa has stretched out on the nearby low grass. At least an hour has passed. Maybe more. Yikes. You know, like, that's horrifying. Like, parents losing their kids, that's just one of those things that's just, it's something that I have never had kids. I've never been interested, but I can only imagine what that's like. And even what I can imagine is so terrible that actually living it must be excruciating. So she goes away for close to an hour, and I'm curious what that looks like. When she goes away, is she rocking back and forth, like mumbling to herself? Is she sobbing, crying? Is she catatonic? Is she... I don't know, And you focus on him uncomfortably, waiting for him to say something about your absence. He just perks up once he sees your back, gets to his feet, and waits. Okay, then. You and he might get along after all. So I love that as well, that he lets her have this moment and doesn't question her about it and doesn't push her to talk and doesn't judge her for it at all. He's ready to go when she's ready to go. But until she's ready, he's perfectly patient. And that was kind of a weirdly beautiful moment. And it's something that, like, I appreciate how much she appreciated that, but I also understand how difficult it is for human beings to, like, just let somebody have that moment when it's a person you care about having a breakdown and you want them to not have a breakdown, because honestly, a breakdown doesn't often seem like it's a good idea. Like, I think they're necessary, and I think they can often lead to pretty good things. But we don't like to watch our friends and loved ones lose their shit and in grief, in anger, in whatever. And so the temptation is real to be like, are you okay? Stop crying. Oh my God. Like, talk to me. Anything like that. And I don't even mean that that's a bad method to dealing with somebody who's flipping out in front of you. Sometimes talking about it, asking them to come back to you is the best thing. So it's a real question here, actually. Is the fact that he just waits for her to be done with her breakdown and then is ready to go, no questions asked, when she comes back from it, is that a good thing? Or would it be better for her mental health to talk about it? I don't know. But we know what she likes, and that is not talking about it. So then here comes the surprise. You can't stay with me. I'll try to find you a calm. We'll be stopping at several along the way if they'll open the gates to trade, but I have to move on even if I find you a place. I'm looking for someone. Your daughter, the boy says, and you stiffen. A moment passes. The boy ignores your shock, humming and petting his little bundle of rags like it's a pet. How did you know that? You whisper. She's very strong. I'm not sure it's her, of course. The boy looks back around at you and smiles, oblivious to your stare. There's a bunch of you in that direction. That always makes it hard. There are a lot of things that probably should be in your mind right now. You only muster the wherewithal to speak one of them aloud. You know where my daughter is? He hums again, non-committally. You're sure he knows just how insane this all sounds. You're sure he's laughing somewhere behind that innocent mask of a face. How? He shrugs. I just know. How? He's not an origine. You'd know your own. Even if he was, origines can't track each other like dogs. I just know, all right? It's something I can do. It's something I've always been able to do. Okay. Well, how far is she? Many days walking. She's going faster than you. The boy nods, watching you. His face is oddly solemn now. There's really not much that's childlike about this child, you notice absently, belatedly. But if he can find your daughter, he can be the evil earth incarnate, and you won't give a damn. I'm not hungry. You haven't eaten. I don't eat much. He picks up his bundle. Maybe he's got supplies in there. Doesn't matter. You don't really care anyway. He's not your kid. He just knows where your kid is. You break camp and resume the journey south, this time with the boy walking beside you, subtly leading the way. So, yeah, This is the moment, because when she says evil earth incarnate, I was just like, what is that exactly? Evil earth. Like, we've heard rusting earth and we've heard, all of these swears. Well, this chapter ends with one of those paragraphs that's like a legend or a quote from somewhere, fictional, obviously. Listen, listen, listen well. There was an age before the seasons when life and earth, its father, thrived alike. Life had a mother too. Something terrible happened to her. Earth, our father, knew he would need clever life, so he used the seasons to shape us out of animals. Clever hands for making things, clever minds for solving problems, clever tongues for working together, and clever sesapine to warn us of danger. I don't know that word. I have to look that up. The people became what Father Earth needed, and then more than he needed. Then we turned on him, and he has burned with hatred for us ever since. Remember what I tell. Lorist Recitation, The Making of Three Peoples, Part 1. So, yikes. Rather than like Father Earth being our buddy, the lore says that Father Earth wants people dead. Humanity dead. Regrets the creation of human beings. That's a lot, to feel like the very earth you live on does not want you there. We love to flatter ourselves in our own religions that we're reflections of God himself and that God is looking out for us and wants us to succeed and, that whole thing. But this is a real different way of looking at it. That there's a God out there and that God is constantly trying to kill us all. God damn. Get it? I didn't mean to do that, but... So, it eventually becomes necessary for Syenite to ask her new mentor's name. Alabaster, he tells her, which she assumes someone gave him ironically. She needs to use his name fairly often because he keeps falling asleep in his saddle during the long days of riding, which leaves her to do all the work of paying attention to their route and watching out for potential hazards, as well as keeping herself entertained. He wakes readily when she speaks his name, which at first leads her to believe he's just faking it in order to avoid talking to her. When she says this, he looks annoyed and says, "Of course I'm really asleep. If you want anything useful out of me tonight, you'll let me sleep." Which pisses her off, because it's not like he's the one who's got to have a baby for Empire and Earth. It's also not like the sex takes any great effort on his part, brief and boring as it is. But a week into their trip, she finally notices what he's doing during their daily rides, and even at night, while they're laying tired and sticky in the sleeping bag they share. She can be forgiven for missing it, she thinks, because it's a constant thing, like a low murmur in a room full of chattering people. But he's quelling all the shakes in the area. All of them. Not just the ones people can feel. All the tiny, infinite... I hate this word, guys. Infinitesimal flexes and adjustments of the earth, some of which are building momentum to greater movement, and some of which are essentially random. Wherever she and Alabaster pass, those movements go still for a time. Seismic stillness is common in Eumenides, but should not exist out here in the hinterlands where node network coverage is thin. Once Syenite figures this out, she is confused, because there's no point to quelling microshakes. And indeed, doing so might make things worse the next time a larger shake occurs. They were very careful to teach her this back when she was a grit learning basic geometry and seismology. The Earth does not like to be restrained. Redirection, not cessation, is the Origine's goal. She ponders this mystery for several days. So, we don't get a flat out, the answer that he gives her when she finally asks why he's doing this is given to her without the benefit of her later understanding of what's going on with the nodes. So, in retrospect, it's very different. He says, "I'm giving the node maintainers a break. Every microshake I settle eases the burden on them." And her reaction is just basically like, well, why would you do that? Like, that's their whole point. And we find out that the nodes are people who are, they're origins, but they're people who are so, like, low level and not really useful in a lot of other senses that they get sent to these super isolated areas and are meant to monitor and send back information. They're outposts is the way that she phrases it. And their sole task is to keep the area that they're in stable. And it says in the equatorials, the node's zones of protection overlap, so there's nary a twitch. This, and the fulcrum's presence at its core, is why Eumenes can build as it does. Beyond the equatorials, though, the zones are spaced to provide the greatest protection for the largest populations, and there are gaps in the net. It's just not worthwhile, at least not according to Fulcrum seniors, to put nodes near every little farming or mining comm in the hinterlands. People in those places fend for themselves as best they can. Syen doesn't know any of the poor fools assigned to such tedious duty, but she's very glad no one suggested it for her. It's the sort of thing they give to origins who'll never make it to Fourth Ring, the ones who have lots of raw power and little control. At least they can save lives, even if they're doomed to spend their own lives in relative isolation and obscurity. Yeah. So, this is just one of those, like, really... Again, in retrospect, it's so sad because she just really thinks that it's somebody living alone in this little hut, probably, or building or whatever. And all they do is just probably sit in front of their fire after breakfast and just work on keeping everything stable in the area. And then they go to bed and then they wake up and they do the same thing again. And it's really tedious and really boring, and they don't have any friends and are not allowed to leave, but at least they're doing some good. And of course, this is the way that she thinks about it, because why wouldn't you? Because we're not maniacs. And she says, maybe you should leave the micros to the node maintainers. Earth knows they probably need something to keep them from dying of boredom. Oh, Syenite, girl, just stop talking. She's intent on the food at first and doesn't notice his silence until she offers him his portion. Then she frowns because that look is on his face again, that hatred. And this time, at least a little of it is directed at her. You've never been to a node, I take it. No, why would I possibly go to one? Because you should. All ragas should. Syenite flinches just a little at his raga. The fulcrum gives demerits to anyone who says it, so she doesn't hear it much. Just the odd muttered epithet from people riding past them, or grits trying to sound tough when the instructors aren't around. It's such an ugly word, harsh and guttural. The sound of it is like a slap to the ear. But Alabaster uses it the way other people use origin. So, let's talk about the word raga, because you can't miss the double G in the middle there, which again, I feel like is on purpose, right? I feel like there's a direct parallel being tied to the word raga and the N-word. And the ugly, harsh, guttural description of it is 100% feeling like an accurate description of the N-word as well. I am happy to say that I have never heard the N-word used in person by a white person. Obviously, I've seen clips online of people saying it. And obviously, plenty of media made by black folks, they use that word, and it's meant in a very different way. But I have never been in the presence of someone using it in a hateful way. And just hearing it in clips and stuff, it's so awful that, and it's not directed at me, and it does not have that, like, historical, like, that punch for me that it would have to someone for whom it's been used against forever. What I'm saying is I'm not a black person, and the N-word is awful to hear for me. So I can't, like, wrap my mind around what it must be like as a Black person to have that word thrown at you. And I find it really interesting, the reaction that she is having to it here. The fact that he's using it. At first, she thinks it's just him sort of like trying to be shocking, I think. I don't think I think she doesn't take Alabaster very seriously. Later on, she says that he's mad. And it's like, well, yeah, he would be, because look at the fucking world. Like, he knows a lot more than you do about what's actually going on. So the fact that he is on the edge all the time makes a great deal of sense. It's kind of like, you know, just becoming more woke in the world. It's a painful process, and it's something that you constantly wonder, would it be better if I didn't know any of this? Would I live a better, happier life if I was ignorant of a lot of the things that I have learned? But, and she's saying like, well, why would I help you? Because then I'm going to be as exhausted as you are. And finally decides that she, like, all right, it's clearly important to him for some reason. So maybe I'll just go ahead and help him out, despite it seeming really pointless to me. And then he finally tells her that he wants to go to a node station that's nearby, 2 days' ride from the next high road turnoff. And she doesn't know how to react. It's an interesting sort of, so I'm going to read this paragraph. She's tried being polite with him and flattering, and it doesn't work. He just pretends to misunderstand or insult her until she stops. She's offered all the little gestures of respect that seniors at the Fulcrum usually seem to expect from juniors, but these just piss him off, which makes her angry. And strangely, this state of affairs seems to please him most. So, he likes when she's angry. If you are someone who's constantly dealing with rage, other people not having rage makes you more angry because they don't get it. They're not angry because they don't understand, which makes you feel alone because you're apparently the only one seeing these things, and makes you feel incredibly frustrated because in some ways you understand why they don't get it. Why would they? They've never had to know. And that's one of the more frustrating things about starting to learn about the world you live in, is realizing that you only have started to figure this out because somebody was patient with you and explained some shit, or because you stumbled onto something that explained in a way that you had never thought of it before. Really, if you're somebody who is not a marginalized person and you start to learn more about other marginalized people and how they're treated, a lot of times you didn't set out to find this stuff out. A lot of times you start off with your mind being open by accident, and trying to force it on someone else, it doesn't often work. You can't tell them. They have to get it and see it themselves. So that's what he's hoping to do by taking her to this node. So they have sex in the morning because they have to. She has to get pregnant, so apparently they're doing it every day. He asks her at one point why she hates him, and she says, "I just do. I think you hate me because I'm someone you can hate. I'm here. I'm handy. But what you really hate is the world." And what is it that he says? Oh, yeah. He says, "I'm not interested in mentoring a sycophant. I want you to be yourself with me, and when you are, you can barely speak a civil word to me, no matter how civil I am to you." "What do you mean, then, that I hate the world?" "You hate the way we live, the way the world makes us live. Either the Fulcrum owns us, or we have to hide and be hunted down like dogs if we're ever discovered, or we become monsters and try and kill everything. Even with the Fulcrum, we always have to think about how they want us to act. We can never just be. There should be a better way. There isn't. There must be. Sansa can't be the first empire that's managed to survive a few seasons. We can see the evidence of other ways of life, other people who became mighty. And then he talks about the stone lore, which this is a really interesting. He talks about, we never try to remember anything about what's already been tried and what else might have worked. And she says, because it didn't work, those people died and we're still alive. And he says, I realize you only have the education the fulcrum gave you, but think, will you? Survival doesn't mean rightness. I could kill you right now, but that wouldn't make me a better person for doing so. All right, tell me what other way there is then. Well, we could try letting Origines run things. She almost laughs. That would last for about 10 minutes before every guardian in the stillness shows up to lynch us. Hi, use of that word, very specific, with half the continent in tow to watch and cheer. They kill us because they've got Stone Lord telling them at every turn that we're born evil, some kind of agents of Father Earth, monsters that barely qualify as human. Yes, but you can't change Stone Lore. Stone Lore changes all the time, Syenite. Even every civilization adds to it. Parts that don't matter to the people of the time are forgotten. There's a reason Tablet 2 is so damaged. Someone somewhere back in time decided it wasn't important, or it was wrong and didn't bother to take care of it. Or maybe they even deliberately tried to obliterate it, which is why so many of the early copies are damaged in exactly the same way. So that's an interesting, what was on the tablets was different, drastically so, from the lore we learned in school. For all we know, the admonition against changing the lore is itself a recent addition. So, this whole idea of this lore on these tablets that they have been studying, being like, it's like the concept of a theocracy built on the Bible, and then somebody finding out that there are a million different translations of the Bible, and that some of those translations interpret very differently the exact same piece of text, or have left whole sections out, or added whole new things in. It's a really, that when you are someone who has never considered that what you have built everything on is created by people, it can be a little bit of like a startling, it's sort of like people who cling to the Constitution as is and feel like it was, written by these perfect examples of, no, it was a bunch of white slave-owning men, and maybe they weren't perfect. I know that's a shocking thought, but maybe we can change it, and that's fine. Maybe we should amend it a lot. But yeah, so I liked this. So then there's this moment, and I'm running out of time here. Forgive me, guys. I just get so excited about talking about this book. All right. Okay. She's not paying attention to the ambient strata because the argument has engrossed her more than she wants to admit. He, however, is apparently still quelling shakes even as they speak. Plus, he's a 10-ringer, so it's fitting that he abruptly inhales and jerks to his feet as if pulled by strings, turning toward the western horizon. So, what happens here, to summarize really quickly, is that there is a supervolcano welling below the surface that she can feel beginning. Like, this is something that could kill millions of people, what's happening here. And he is trying to hold it back and manages to somehow reach into her and pull her power out. She feels her own connection to the earth, her own originic awareness, suddenly co-opted and steered by someone else, and she does not like it one bit. But when she tries to reclaim control of her power, it burns like friction, and in the real world she yelps and falls to her knees, and she has no idea what's happening. Alabaster has chained them together somehow, using her strength to amplify his own, and there's not a damned thing she can do about it. And then they are together, diving into the earth in tandem, spiraling through the massive boiling well of death that is the hot spot. It's huge, miles wide, bigger than a mountain. Alabaster does something, and something shoots away, and Syenite cries out in sudden agony that stills almost at once, redirected. He does it again, and this time she realizes what he's doing, cushioning her from the heat and pressure and rage of the hot spot. It's not bothering him because he has become heat and pressure and rage as well, attuning himself to it as Syen only ever has done with small heat chambers and otherwise stable strata. But those were campfire sparks in comparison to this firestorm. There is nothing in her that can equal it, so he uses her power, but he also vents the force she can't process, sending it elsewhere before it can overwhelm her awareness. And actually, she's not sure what would happen. The fulcrum teaches Origins not to push past their own limits. It does not speak of what happens to those who do. And they manage to calm this thing. Somehow, he saves like millions of lives and almost looks like he has died. Like he's on the ground, covered in frost, really like just in a bad way. It's just like Syenite said, he whispers suddenly. I don't know what that means, but I'm hoping that we get an explanation of that. Syenite. So she's like, well, what the hell happened? And how did he grab my power? I did not know that was possible. And how did he hold this all back? Like the strength that he must have is so far beyond even what a 10 ring should be capable of. It's just like there's just a million things happening here that should not be happening the way they are. So he says they have to go to the node station, which she doesn't want to do because it's so far out of their way. But he really, really is like serious about it. And they do. They head over there. It is a bad scene right out of the gate. There are bodies in the courtyard. There are dead horses in the stables. And the people in the neighboring areas that, like, when they're heading there had been really unwelcoming to them. Now, because there was obviously something that almost happened, they see the Origins coming and are like, oh, thank God. And it's just, it makes me so angry. So I'm finding this moment where she realizes exactly what's going on. 3 dead horses. Then Syen finds the node chamber. That's what it has to be. It's in the middle of the building through an elegant archway decorated with paler rose marble and embossed tree root designs. The chamber beyond is high and vaulted and dim, but empty, except at the room center where there's a big thing. She would call it a chair if it was made of anything but wires and straps. Not very comfortable looking, except in that it seems to hold its occupant at an easy recline. The node maintainer is seated in it anyway, so it must be... Oh, bloody burning earth. Alabaster's standing on the dais that holds the wire chair, looking down at the node maintainer's body. He doesn't look up as she comes near. His face is still, not sad or bleak, just a mask. Even the least of us must serve the greater good, he says, with no irony in his voice. The body in the node maintainer's chair is small and naked, thin, its limbs atrophied, hairless. There are things, tubes and pipes and things, she has no words for them, going into the stick arms, down the goggle throat, across the narrow crotch. There's a flexible bag on the corpse's belly attached to its belly somehow, and it's full of... The bag needs to be changed. She focuses on all this, these little details, because it helps. Because there's a part of her that's gibbering, and the only way she can keep that part internal and silent is to concentrate on everything she's seeing. Ingenious, really, what they've done. She didn't know it was possible to keep a body alive like this, immobile, unwilling, indefinite. So she concentrates on figuring out how they've done it. The wire framework is a particular bit of genius. There's a crank and a handle nearby, so the whole apparatus can be flipped over to facilitate cleaning. The wire minimizes bed sores, maybe. There's a stench of sickness in the air, but nearby is a whole shelf of bottled tinctures and pills. Understandable, since it would take better antibiotics than ordinary calm-made penicillin to do something like this. Perhaps one of the tube things is for putting that medicine into the node maintainer. And this one is for pushing in food. And that one is for taking away urine. Oh, and that cloth wrapping is for sopping up drool. But she sees the bigger picture too, in spite of her effort to concentrate on the minutia. The node maintainer. A child. Kept like this for what must have been months or years. A child whose skin is almost as dark as Alabaster's and whose features might be a perfect match for his if they weren't so skeletal. What? It's all she can say. Sometimes a raga can't learn control. Now she understands his use of the slur is deliberate. A dehumanizing word for someone who has been made into a thing. It helps. There's no inflection in Alabaster's voice, no emotion, but it's all there in his choice of words. Sometimes the guardians catch a feral who's too old to train but young enough that killing's a waste. And sometimes they notice someone in the grit pool, one of the especially sensitive ones who can't seem to master control. The fulcrum tries to teach them for a while, but if the children don't develop at a pace the guardians think is appropriate, Mother Sansa can always find another use for them. I knew children who were taken off to the nodes, but I didn't... It doesn't... You should see this. She doesn't want to, but she looks anyway. There across the back of the child's shaved head is a long vining keloided scar, embellished with the dots of long pulled stitches. It's just at the juncture of skull and spine. Raga Cessapine are larger and more complex than those of normal people. I'm going to look this up right now. Cessapine. The first result I got was the 5th season, so I'm afraid to click on that because that is gonna be spoilers. It's all spoilers. Okay. Maybe I'll learn about that later. I won't look that up now because I don't want to spoil myself. When she's seen enough, Alabaster drops the child's head. It's a simple matter to apply a lesion here and there that severs the raga's self-control completely while still allowing its instinctive use, assuming the raga survives the operation. From there, it's easy. Drug away the infections and so forth, keep him alive enough to function, and you've got one thing even the fulcrum can't provide, a reliable, harmless, completely beneficial source of orogeny. But I suppose someone made the mistake of letting this one wake up. His eyes flick away, and Syenite follows Alabaster's gaze to the body of a man over by the far wall. This one's not dressed like one of the soldiers. He's wearing civilian clothes. Nice ones. The doctor? She's managed to adopt the detached, steady voice that Alabaster's using. It's easier. Maybe. Or some local citizen who paid for the privilege. Alabaster actually shrugs, gesturing towards a still livid bruise on the boy's upper thigh. It's in the shape of a hand, finger marks clearly visible even against the dark skin. I'm told there are many who enjoy this sort of thing, a helplessness fetish, basically. They like it more if the victim is aware of what they're doing. Oh, Earth, Alabaster, you can't mean... He rides over her words again as if she hasn't spoken. Problem is, the node maintainer feels terrible pain whenever they use orogeny, the lesions, see. Since they can't stop themselves from reacting to every shake in the vicinity, even the microshakes, it's considered humane to keep them constantly sedated, and all orogenies react instinctively to any perceived threat. Ah, that does it. Syenite stumbles away to the nearest wall and retches up the dried apricots and jerky she made herself swallow a horseback on the way to the station. It's wrong. It's all so wrong. She didn't know. Like I said, he concludes very softly, every raga should see a node, at least once. Guys, That is some shit. So, if the Fulcrum can do this, or the guardians of the Eumenicine leadership, or the Geomists, or whoever came up with this nightmare, then there's no point in dressing up what people like Syenite and Alabaster really are. Not people at all. Not origins. Politeness is an insult in the face of what she's seen. Raga. This is all they are. After a moment, Alabaster turns and leaves the room. All right, so then they talk a little bit about his children, the fact that they're going to have children. Hopefully, like if things work out. I say hopefully, but I kind of feel like not really hopeful. And she says that, like, well, we could have a child that doesn't have power at all. Even Origins can have a still. And he's like, yeah, and then the still becomes a guardian. Yeah, this is just so awful. Okay. He tells her to forget everything that she saw. That thing in the chair wasn't a child. It wasn't my child or anyone else's. It was nothing and it was no one. We stabilized the hotspot, figured out what caused it to almost blow. We've checked here for survivors and found none. That's what we'll telegraph to the Eumenes. That's what we'll both say if we're questioned when we get back. If you mourn the wasted resource. If anyone asks, you're glad he's dead. Feel it. Believe it. He almost killed more people than we can count, after all. And if anyone asks how you feel about it, say you understand that's why they do these things to us. You know it's for our own good. You know it's for everyone's. And they almost get in a fight here. While she stares at him in chilled realization, he slaps his knee with one hand, still laughing, because what he wants to do is destroy everything in sight. And if his half-dead, half-grown son could touch off a supervolcano, there's really no telling what that boy's father could do if he set his mind to it, or even by accident if his control slips for a moment. So yeah, that's pretty serious. I've been crazy for years. If you stay with me for long, you will be too. If you see enough of this and understand enough of what it all means. If you kill me, you'll be doing the whole world a favor. So, interlude. A break in the pattern, a snarl in the weft. There are things you should be noticing here, things that are missing and conspicuous by their absence. Notice, for example, that no one in the stillness speaks of islands. This is not because islands do not exist or are uninhabited. Quite the contrary. It's because islands tend to form near faults or atop hotspots, which means there are ephemeral things in the planetary scale, there with an eruption and gone with the next tsunami. But human beings, too, are ephemeral things in the planetary scale. The number of things that they do not notice are literally astronomical. People in the stillness do not speak of other continents either, though it is plausible to suspect they might exist elsewhere. No one has traveled around the world to see that there aren't any. Seafaring is dangerous enough with resupply in sight, and tsunami waves that are only 100 feet high, rather than the legendary mountains of water said to ripple across the unfettered deep ocean. They simply take as a given the bit of lore passed down from braver civilizations that says there's nothing else. Likewise, no one speaks of celestial objects, though the skies are as crowded and busy here as anywhere else in the universe. This is largely because so much of the people's attention is directed towards the ground, not the sky. They notice what's there, stars and sun, and occasional comets or falling stars. They do not notice what's missing. But then, how can they? Who misses what they have never even imagined? That would not be human nature. How fortunate, then, that there are more people in this world than just humankind. To which I want to be like, what? What does that mean? But I'm running over time, boys and girls. So I'm going to have to leave you with that. And your theories, if you haven't read this far. And your smugness, if you have. Thank you all so much for listening. Thank you to Ashlynn for commissioning this. This is a really good book, guys. Toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.